playful, were in fact markers of a chilling intent, a silent communication that whispered across states and decades. The public, unaware of the depth of the investigation, remained largely oblivious, seeing only sporadic news reports, drowned accidents, and a theory dismissed as conspiracy. Yet the theory persisted, drawing researchers, journalists, and amateur sleuths into its intricate web, challenging perceptions of safety and normalcy. Each discovery of a previously unnoticed smiley face near a waterway, each account from friends who remembered the eerie atmosphere of the night, reinforced the haunting possibility that behind the laughter and nightlife of young adulthood lurked a calculated, organized darkness. The narrative reached into communities, shaking trust and instilling a persistent fear that no matter how ordinary a night seemed, unseen eyes might be watching, calculating, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike, leaving only questions, grief, and the faint, mocking curve of a smiley face to mark the presence of a predator who operated beyond the reach of law and reason. As the years progressed, the web of disappearances and recoveries deepened, revealing chilling consistencies that defied logic and casual explanation. And while some authorities continued to dismiss the smiley face killer theory as speculative or conspiratorial, the detectives and independent researchers had amassed compelling circumstantial evidence pointing to a coordinated effort, a network of killers working with precise methodology across states, selecting victims based on their youth, social habits, and vulnerability, often preying on those who ventured out late at night or attended crowded social events before vanishing into obscurity. Families endured nights of sleepless worry, combing the streets and waterways, haunted by the memory of the last phone call, the fleeting glance of a stranger, or the sudden, inexplicable change in their loved one's demeanor. And in many cases, the recovery of bodies only intensified the mystery, with forensic examinations revealing unusual submersion patterns, signs of restraint, or marks suggesting an intentional placement of the victims in locations where currents and terrain would both conceal and reveal, a twisted artistry that hinted at a mind or minds obsessed with both control and performance. The graffiti of the smiley face, initially dismissed as mere coincidence or college prank, became the signature of this dark network, small variations in the lines, placement, and surrounding markings conveying messages understood only by those orchestrating the crimes. A silent communication spanning years and hundreds of miles, and while mainstream media coverage remained sporadic, online communities of amateur detectives, true crime enthusiasts, and investigative journalists meticulously documented each death, mapping locations, timelines, and victim profiles to uncover the underlying pattern of predation. Survivors and witnesses occasionally reported strange interactions, fleeting shadows, inexplicable surveillance, untraceable vehicles parked nearby, that suggested the perpetrators were watching, studying, and learning, always one step ahead. And in some horrifying instances, friends would recount feelings of a sudden compulsion or pressure to leave a scene, an invisible hand guiding victims toward the moments of their ultimate vulnerability, as if fate itself had been manipulated by an unseen orchestrator. The detectives' exhaustive research revealed unsettling connections. Rivers and urban waterways acted as preferred disposal sites, not only for their concealment but also for the symbolic act of erasure and revelation. The natural flow of water washing away evidence while leaving a haunting presence, and the smiley face markings, whether sprayed on nearby walls, scrawled on bridges, or etched subtly into signage, served as both a taunt and a message, a reminder that someone, or a network of individuals, was systematically asserting control over life and death with terrifying precision. Public awareness, while growing slowly through documentaries, podcasts, and news exposés, often met resistance from law enforcement and skeptical journalists. Yet the weight of pattern and persistence could not be ignored. The victims' profiles were remarkably similar, their last known movements traced along predictable paths, and in each instance, those closest to them reported a creeping sense of dread, a perception that something unseen had been following, waiting, marking its prey. Families' grief turned to obsession for some, as they retraced steps, examined local graffiti, and even confronted shadowy figures whose presence could not be easily explained. Yet the theory's controversial nature meant resources were limited, official investigations sporadic, and coordination across jurisdictions minimal, leaving the detectives and civilian researchers to pursue leads that law enforcement deemed too tenuous. As the story of the smiley face killer expanded across public consciousness, chilling narratives emerged. Victims last seen laughing with friends, texting on phones, or walking along familiar streets were later found submerged, restrained, or partially concealed, their deaths blending seamlessly into the guise of accident while subtle clues hinted at a malevolent intent, and the consistent appearance of smiley face symbols near recovery sites became a haunting motif, a silent, sinister signature linking cases across time and geography. The detectives continued compiling data, cross-referencing every known incident, and while skepticism from peers and media persisted, the connections were undeniable. Rivers, highways, bars, graffiti, shadowy figures, and final hours converged in patterns that suggested not randomness, but design, a grim orchestration that transcended conventional criminal behavior. Eventually, awareness of the theory prompted both fear and fascination, inspiring books, documentaries, and online forums dedicated to piecing together the scattered evidence, each new discovery reinforcing the notion that an organized, possibly ritualistic group of killers had operated with meticulous care, leaving only subtle marks, the smiley face, the placement of a body, the chosen waterways, to indicate their presence. The narrative became both a cautionary tale and a chilling mystery. Young men, often brimming with life, ambition, and promise, could vanish without a trace, and the world might never know if accidents were truly accidents or the calculated outcome of a network operating in darkness, unseen yet profoundly felt. To this day, families, detectives, and researchers remain vigilant, tracing the lingering shadows, analyzing every new disappearance, and interpreting each smiley face not as a simple doodle, but as a haunting testament to a theory that challenges perceptions of safety, normality, and human malevolence, leaving an enduring question echoing in the hearts of all who study it. How many more have been claimed, and how many more might vanish, while the sinister signature of the smiley face killer silently endures across rivers, towns, and the very fabric of a nation that refuses to fully acknowledge the darkness beneath its streets? The story, sprawling and complex, remains unresolved, a dark tapestry of mystery and fear, demanding attention, reflection, and an awareness that in the ordinary routines of life, extraordinary danger may lurk, leaving only the faint, mocking curve of a smiley face to signify the unseen hand that orchestrates tragedy with meticulous care. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the quiet towns and bustling college campuses of the Midwest and East Coast seemed to hide a sinister pattern that few could see at first glance. Young men, often promising students or athletes, vanished after nights out with friends, their absence initially shrugged off as typical college disappearances or drunken misadventures, until their bodies began to surface, floating lifelessly in rivers, streams, or isolated ponds, the circumstances meticulously disguised as accidental drownings. Authorities often cited intoxication or reckless behavior as the cause, and the media echoed this narrative. Yet beneath the surface, a darker truth seemed to pulse. The smiley face graffiti found near many of the recovery sites, a simple yellow circle with 2 dots and a curved line, appeared too frequently to be coincidence. Retired detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, both seasoned with decades of experience in homicide investigations, began to notice a chilling pattern. Each death bore subtle similarities, not just in age and appearance, but in the locations chosen for the bodies to be found, almost as if someone or a group had studied the perfect camouflage for murder in plain sight. These men, vibrant with youth, athletic prowess, and social promise, had been ensnared in a carefully orchestrated series of killings that crossed state lines. And yet, with no apparent connection between victims, authorities remained skeptical, clinging to conventional explanations. Friends and family recalled the last moments before disappearance. Nights filled with laughter, casual flirtations, or routine errands, nothing that suggested imminent danger. Yet forensic analysis began revealing troubling consistencies. Signs of restraint, subtle bruising inconsistent with accidental submersion, and in some cases, surveillance footage, showing shadowy figures observing or following the victims before they vanished. As the news spread and patterns emerged, a theory that once seemed absurd, now called the smiley face killer theory, gained traction in certain investigative circles. suggesting not a lone murderer but a network of killers operating under a chilling pact, a clandestine fraternity bound by ritualistic obsession with youth and anonymity. The detectives, fueled by frustration with local police dismissal, began mapping every known case across the Midwest, overlaying rivers, highways, and urban graffiti sites, discovering an eerie geographic coherence. Interviews with surviving friends revealed shared encounters with unnerving strangers, a common theme of being watched, of feeling subtly coerced or threatened before the disappearances. The smiley face symbols themselves, once dismissed as innocuous pranks, revealed hidden variations, small markings, subtle shifts in line curvature, placement at specific angles, suggesting communication, perhaps a signature or code among the perpetrators. Meanwhile, internet forums and amateur investigators began connecting that professionals hesitated to acknowledge, uncovering cases long buried under bureaucratic red tape or quietly labeled as unexplained accidents. A growing unease settled over families and communities alike. Could these deaths truly be random, or were they part of a methodical, almost ritualistic selection, preying on those most likely to be alone, vulnerable, yet socially active? Each detail added to the mounting horror. Victims' shoes carefully removed, personal items left untouched except for a single item relocated in a manner suggesting intentional placement. And in some instances, messages left on online profiles that hinted at foreknowledge of the events. The narrative unfolded like a dark tapestry of premeditation, painting a picture not just of murder but of psychological manipulation. A predator's intelligence operating under the guise of everyday life, hidden in bars, streets, and college parties. And while law enforcement agencies largely remain skeptical, citing a lack of forensic proof linking the cases beyond circumstantial similarities, the detectives pressed on, compiling extensive dossiers, interviewing families, retracing final steps, and, above all, refusing to let the deaths fade into anonymous statistics. With each new case added to the map, the pattern crystallized into an almost artistic cruelty. Bodies always found near water, in locations with strong currents to obscure evidence, yet chosen for maximum visibility to those who might care, a morbid announcement that a sinister presence had passed through and left its mark. The theory, controversial as it was, ignited a quiet obsession among those who refused to forget, sparking debates in criminology circles, podcasts, and documentary films, drawing attention to the invisible dangers lurking behind seemingly ordinary nights. Friends and witnesses described an unsettling phenomenon, a sudden, inexplicable shift in the environment around the victims, a shadow crossing a path, a car idling in silence, a stranger lingering just long enough to be memorable yet untraceable. And amid this mounting evidence, a terrifying question loomed over every investigation. If the deaths were not accidents, how many more had been overlooked, misclassified, or ignored, leaving killers free to continue their work under the radar, their sinister smiley face signatures scattered like breadcrumbs across the country? As the detectives compiled their findings into comprehensive reports, the pattern was undeniable to them. The victims were not random, the locations not coincidental, and the symbols, while seemingly. The sea does not whisper warnings, it swallows them. And on a humid night in the Strait of Malacca in 1947, it carried a message that would outlive every man who heard it. A broken distress call that crackled through the static and froze seasoned operators where they stood. All officers, including captain, are dead. Lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. And then, after a stretch of suffocating silence, came the final words, fragile and resigned, "I die," before the signal dissolved into nothing. The American merchant vessel that intercepted the transmission altered course at once, cutting across the dark water toward the drifting coordinates of a Dutch freighter known as the Orang Medan. A ship that should have been alive with engine noise and deck watchmen and the routine clang of maritime labor, but instead floated motionless under a bruised sky, her lights dim, her hull streaked with salt and neglect, as if she had aged years in a single night. When the rescue crew drew alongside, they called out first in English, then in Dutch, then in Malay, and received no answer except the slap of waves against steel. So a boarding party crossed over with ropes and boots thudding softly against the deck, finding no signs of struggle at first glance. No blood, no gunfire damage, no wreckage, only an uncanny stillness that seemed to press against the lungs. And then they saw the first body near the rail, a sailor sprawled on his back, eyes wide open to the sky, mouth frozen in a grimace so intense it felt indecent to look at. His fingers curled as though he had tried to claw something away from his own face. They moved deeper into the ship and discovered more men collapsed in corridors, in cabins, beside equipment, all wearing the same expression of raw terror, their skin pale but unmarked, their uniforms undisturbed, as if death had swept through like an invisible tide and extinguished them where they stood. In the chart room lay the captain and his officers, rigid in their final positions, one hand still gripping the edge of a table, another pointing toward a map that now meant nothing, and even the ship's dog, found near the engine room ladder, had died baring its teeth at something unseen. The rescuers checked for pulse after pulse, knowing it was useless, noting how the bodies were neither decomposed nor recently warm, trapped in a strange middle state that defied simple explanation. And as they ventured below deck, the air grew heavier, warmer than it should have been. A subtle heat that seemed to radiate from the cargo hold, though no fire was visible. No smoke yet tainted the passageways. Whispers began among the boarding party, practical men unsettled not by superstition but by the pattern of it all, the symmetry of horror etched onto every face, the synchronized collapse of an entire crew without a single defensive wound. And one of them swore later that he felt as though he were being watched from the far end of the corridor, a sensation that made him turn sharply only to find emptiness and the groan of shifting metal. They regrouped on deck to decide their next move, debating tow procedures and salvage rights while glancing uneasily toward the silent bridge. And it was then that a faint haze drifted up through the hatch from below, thin at first, almost indistinguishable from the sea mist, but carrying with it a sharp chemical tang that stung the throat, prompting shouts to investigate. Two men descended again despite their rising dread, handkerchiefs pressed to their mouths, discovering that the temperature near the cargo hold had intensified and that several crates were stacked without proper markings. There was sweating as though something volatile simmered within, and before they could examine them further, a tremor rippled through the hull, subtle yet unmistakable, like the prelude to a violent cough. The boarding officer ordered immediate evacuation, and the men scrambled back across to their own vessel just as a column of darker smoke erupted from the lower deck of the Aurang Medan, followed by a thunderous explosion that split the night and lifted the freighter's midsection into a bloom of fire, the blast so forceful it seemed to tear open the very secret they had come to uncover. And within minutes, the ship that had transmitted its dying confession was engulfed, listing, cracking, and finally sliding beneath the surface in a boiling churn of debris and flame, taking with it the corpses, the cargo, and any straightforward answers. In the days that followed, reports circulated in fragmented forms, some claiming the cargo had been illicit chemicals destabilized by heat and seawater, others suggesting carbon monoxide from faulty boilers had suffocated the crew, and a few whispering that the contorted expressions on those faces told of something far less mundane, something that could not be measured in parts per million or traced in engine schematics. Investigators sought registration documents only to find inconsistencies and missing entries, fueling rumors that the ship's very identity was a fabrication or a cover for clandestine transport during a tense post-war climate. And as newspapers sensationalized the story, the image of those frozen stairs captured the public imagination more vividly than any technical theory ever could. Sailors across Southeast Asian routes began sharing embellished retellings in dockside bars, speaking of ghost lights flickering where the freighter had sunk, of compasses spinning erratically near those coordinates, of radios picking up phantom echoes of that final message on certain humid nights, while officials quietly filed their incomplete reports and moved on to more manageable tragedies. Yet for the men who had stepped aboard, the memory lingered in subtler ways, in dreams where corridors stretched longer than before and footsteps echoed behind them without source, in sudden recollections of the oppressive heat rising from below deck, in the uneasy conviction that whatever had claimed the crew had not been chaos but order, not a random accident but a single sweeping force that had visited each man in turn. One rescuer later confided that he could not forget the eyes of the radio operator, how they seemed fixed not in terror alone but in recognition, as if he had understood the nature of his fate in the instant before it struck, and that detail troubled him more than any explosion ever could. Speculation multiplied over the years, some pointing to unstable compounds like potassium cyanide reacting with seawater to release toxic fumes, others arguing that nitroglycerin improperly stored could have both poisoned and detonated, and skeptics questioning whether the entire narrative had been amplified or even invented by mid-century tabloids hungry for maritime horror, citing the absence of solid registry records as evidence of myth-making. But myth or not, the pattern remained compelling. A distress call too coherent to be pure fabrication, bodies too uniformly posed in fear to dismiss lightly, and an explosion conveniently erasing physical proof before forensic clarity could intervene. Historians revisiting the tale decades later found only fragments, reprinted clippings, anecdotal testimonies, and maritime gossip layered thick with time. Yet the story persisted because it touched something primal, the dread of isolation on open water where the horizon offers no witness and death can arrive without footprint. The Aurang Medan became less a vessel and more a symbol, a floating memento mori drifting through collective memory, embodying the fear that there are forces indifferent to human preparedness, forces that can sweep across steel decks and disciplined crews with silent efficiency. And perhaps the most unsettling element was not the possibility of poison or explosion but the synchronized expression of terror, as though each man had glimpsed the same incomprehensible present seconds before his heart stopped. A shared final vision that would never be recorded in any logbook, leaving only the echo of a voice over radio static declaring the end in words. Simple and absolute, a confession to the void that the sea accepted without reply. Years passed, yet the coordinates where the Aurang Medan vanished became a quiet obsession for a small circle of maritime researchers and thrill-seekers who believed that beneath layers of silt and shifting currents there might still rest fragments capable of explaining the synchronized deaths. And in the late 1960s, a privately funded expedition set out with diving equipment and sonar technology primitive by modern standards but advanced enough to trace irregularities along the seabed. Their leader, a former naval engineer determined to separate folklore from fact, though he carried with him copies of the original distress transcript as if they were sacred text. The team located what appeared to be scattered wreckage consistent with a mid-century cargo ship, twisted beams and corroded plating embedded in sediment, and while storms forced them to abort deeper penetration on their first attempt, they recovered small debris pieces that bore no obvious chemical residue after preliminary testing, a disappointment that should have ended the mystery but instead intensified it, because absence of evidence felt like deliberate concealment. On their second dive a month later, one diver reported an unusual sensation descending through the murk, describing the water as inexplicably warm in pockets despite seasonal norms. And though instruments showed only minor thermal fluctuation, the subjective detail echoed the rescuers' earlier accounts of heat below deck, prompting renewed focus. On the theory of volatile cargo, they documented a section of hull with partial lettering still visible, enough to suggest authenticity yet not enough to silence doubters. And as they prepared to surface, a sudden equipment malfunction disrupted communication lines, flooding their headsets with sharp static that one diver later claimed resembled fragmented speech. Though recordings revealed only distortion, a coincidence skeptics dismissed but believers seized upon. Tragedy nearly struck when a tether line snapped and a diver became briefly entangled in debris, emerging shaken and pale, insisting that in the seconds before his partner freed him he had seen shapes moving beyond the beam of his flashlight, forms that retreated too quickly to identify, an admission he regretted once back on deck where rational colleagues attributed it to nitrogen narcosis and stress. Funding dwindled, media interest flickered and faded, and the expedition concluded without definitive proof. Yet personal journals from its members painted a subtler picture of unease, of recurring dreams in which they stood on an empty deck under a bruised sky hearing the faint echo of a man whispering that he was dying. Decades later, historians examining declassified shipping records from the immediate post-war period uncovered hints that certain vessels had indeed transported undeclared hazardous materials through Southeast Asian waters, lending plausibility to the toxic gas hypothesis, and laboratory simulations demonstrated that improper storage of cyanide compounds in humid conditions could generate lethal fumes capable of inducing rapid respiratory collapse without external injury, a scenario tidy enough to satisfy many analysts. Still, that explanation struggled to account for the uniform expressions of terror described by the boarding crew, because chemical asphyxiation typically renders victims confused or lethargic rather than frozen in collective horror, and the synchronized pointing gesture reported in the chart room lingered as an odd detail, suggesting that attention had been drawn to something specific before death intervened. Cultural anthropologists studying maritime superstition propose that fear itself can propagate through confined groups with astonishing speed, that one man's panic at an unseen stimulus can cascade into mass hysteria, particularly in isolated environments where escape is impossible, and perhaps a sudden release of gas combined with misinterpreted shadows could have triggered a psychological chain reaction culminating in cardiac arrest for already stressed sailors, an explanation that blended physiology with terror in a way both mundane and haunting. Yet there remained the question of the explosion, whether it was inevitable chemical detonation or something catalyzed by the boarding party's presence, and conspiracy theorists argued that the destruction conveniently erased incriminating evidence of illegal cargo, suggesting covert interests ensured the wreck would never be thoroughly examined, though hard proof of such interference never surfaced. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, digital forums revived the legend, layering it with embellishments about ghostly apparitions and cursed coordinates, and modern divers equipped with advanced sonar occasionally scan the region only to find shifting sands that conceal as much as they reveal, because the sea is an archivist that edits relentlessly. What endures is not a definitive answer but the image of that final transmission, a human voice acknowledging imminent death in the simplest language possible, stripped of flourish, and the boarding crew's testimony of faces locked in a shared vision no survivor could describe. Perhaps the truest curse of the Aurang Medan is not supernatural at all but epistemological, a reminder that some events slip between documentation and oblivion, leaving behind just enough trace to provoke endless retelling, and that ambiguity itself can haunt more persistently than any specter. The sea continues to churn above the wreckage, indifferent to debate, and ships still traverse those waters without incident. Yet on certain nights when humidity thickens the air and radios hiss with atmospheric interference, sailors who know the story may feel a flicker of unease, imagining a freighter adrift in darkness, its crew staring upward at something only they can see, a synchronized moment of realization passing across every face before silence claims the deck. Whether the cause was poison, panic, illicit cargo, or narrative invention, the legend endures because it confronts a fundamental fear of the unknown, the possibility that there are circumstances in which human understanding fails collectively and suddenly, leaving only a brief transmission into the void before the signal dies, and in that final echo, suspended between fact and folklore, the Aurang Medan continues to drift through maritime history, not as confirmed ghost ship nor solved accident, but as a question mark etched against the horizon, daring each new generation to decide what they believe happened on that silent deck where every man died with his eyes open.